Hi, didn't see you there. We're back today. We've got Rathbone. He's hanging out with us today. He's all the way down in New Orleans. What's going on, buddy?
What's up? Welcome. Welcome to me, I guess. Thank you for having me. Uh, Happy to be here. Thanks for having me on the podcast. Yes, it's I'm in New Orleans, and it's Mardi Gras. I'm feeling festive, so yeah, it's about to get wild around here. But I'm in like sort of like the epicenter of all the parades, and I usually just try to hide in my apartment to escape it all. But it's still a little fun. You know, you go out there for a little bit and see the madness, and then you get your fill of it and come back inside and brood. That's what I
Right.
do. Brood.
Fer- Ferment. Yeah, that's what I would do. Yeah.
Try to escape the world, you know?
Yeah.
Um, so
What
yeah.
What's it like down there in New Orleans? I mean, obviously, I live there. You live there. Uh, it's like a wonderful party city, but at the same time, there's this dark side of everything. What's the politics like there? I mean, you do politics in general. How are they down there?
Yeah, I mean it's a wild place to live, I would say. You know, it's very corrupt. Louisiana is known for its corruption. Uh, you know, the mayor that we have right now is like very unpopular for, you know, misusing funds and embezzling and all these accusations of, you know, crimes, basically. She's still in office, so I don't know. There was like a petition to try to get her out of office. It just seems like and I've lived here all my life, so it seems like every mayor we have gets embroiled in some scandal, you know, and that's just the nature of it. But yeah, there's a lot of examples of, you know, corruption, and you know, I look at it as being you know, an effect of capitalism. Basically, I feel like every problem goes back to capitalism, and I don't think it's, you know, any different here than other places, but maybe it's more exaggerated here. Maybe it's a little bit more open. The streets are really terrible. They never fix the streets. The infrastructure is not so great. Obviously, we know that in 2005, the Hurricane Katrina completely flooded the city, and you know, there's still remnants of that, even though we've done I think, a good job of rebuilding when nobody said that we could. And, you know, the city is sinking. It's slowly sinking. We're in a bowl, you know, and it's like it sinks at different parts, like greater in different parts than in other parts. So it's like it's not even, and you can see that when you're driving around. It's like the streets are like going like this, you know. And I was riding in an Uber, and the lady was like schooling me on how you can look at the fire hydrants, because when the fire hydrants were planted in the ground, they, you know, that was where the ground was, but the ground sinks over time, and now you can see like what was going into the ground, with the, you know, at the base of the fire hydrant. And you can see, if you look at different fire hydrants, they're uneven. Like some are taller than others. It means that the city is sinking at different rates, you know. And yeah, it's going to fall into the ocean at some point. I mean, like it is going to be the lost city of Atlantis, and I don't think there's really anything to do about it. So it's kind of sad, you know. But I feel like, yeah, it's my home, and my family's been here for centuries, and
Really? Wow. Centuries.
yeah, ever since like the, you know, founding of New Orleans. Yeah, it goes. My family history goes back quite a bit in New Orleans.
Archduke
Um,
Ferdinand Rathbone.
no, no, nothing like that. Although you know, this is going to sound, I don't know what it's going to sound like, but um, one of the first mayor of New Orleans, when New Orleans became an American city, is actually one of my ancestors. So there's like a long line of course, I'm sure there's all sorts of things about my family that are probably awful, you know, looking back, you know, at what was going on in the United States at the time.
Yeah.
Just, you know, reading about the history of the United States, that's another thing we could talk about, just
Oh God.
how yeah, how crazy that all is.
I recently had an interview with Bill Ayers, the guy from the Weathermen Underground, the famous uh, far left, quote unquote terrorist group, and he said something about how you know slave owners at the time were using the Bible as a way to endorse slavery, right? And a bunch of people took offense to this, like this wasn't a real thing. I mean, what do you think?
That a far left leader of a what is it a what kind of group is this?
Well, the Weathermen Underground, what they did, they were protesting the Vietnam War, and
Oh,
what they did was started to like plant bombs and like blow up statues of like old colonial people. They put cool. Um,
we have a statue. We just a couple blocks from me. There was for the longest time it was Robert E. Lee Circle, and
yeah.
Robert E. Lee was like famous Confederate general, and that recently, like within the past 10 years, that was taken down. I think that was a good thing. I think that they haven't replaced it. Now it's just the circle. It's better
Mm.
than it being Lee Circle, obviously. But I think maybe they should put like a famous musician from New Orleans. It's like Fats Domino. Put him on the
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Alan Toussaint.
Yeah.
But
What?
anyway,
What's the? I mean, what about? Wasn't there Congo Square was also called something totally Confederate at some time or something?
oh really? Yeah, Congo Square. You're talking about like the birthplace of jazz music, as
Right.
some like to say historically. But that's for your viewers that don't know. That's where this is obviously, like you said, New Orleans has a dark history. It was had a lot of slave trade. It was like a epicenter for that at one point. And how crazy is this that slaves living in the French Quarter, their free time to they had like every Sunday from like 3 p.m. to sundown, they could go walk to what you're referring to, Congo Square, and dance and sing and like exchange. And like these are slaves from the Caribbean and Africa, and they would congregate and share things like music and dance and ideas and stuff. And they say that was like the beginnings of jazz music, because jazz music evolved out of a lot of these different cultures. It was like African, it was Caribbean, it was Western European, and but yeah, I just think that's it's pretty wild that like that was their free time, and they had like a couple hours every week to go be free. I mean, as much as that sort of situation could allow for freedom, but
Yeah.
anyway, that's
Well, that was a funny place. New Orleans was a funny place because that was the first. It was French, first of all, and then it also had this like one of the first places in the South that would accept people of a different color. And like, this is a free man from France. He's black. You have to treat him like a free man while you're in New Orleans. And people would port there, dock there, and stuff. And then they just were like uh, the first to integrate, but still super racist.
oh, absolutely, yeah. That's weird.
Yeah,
That there's all these little different classifications, but yeah, it was French, then Spanish, and I think it was French again, and then it was sold to the Americans. And there's a lot of pirates down here. It's a big, rich pirate history. Jean Lafitte. There's all kinds of crazy stories about the city. But yeah, it's mostly known as a drinking town, and I don't like that that it is. Well, I don't really like to drink, but I live in a city that like that's like one of its main. That's why people come here. But I think people forget that there's a rich history, and it's a unique place. It's like a little. It's a little European haven in the middle of America. It's
yeah,
just like not like other cities. And I think when I go to a new city, I like to like feel like I'm in that. You can catch a vibe of how that city is, and there's something about that place that is unique. And not every city has it, but I think New Orleans has it.
yeah. It definitely does. It's
Yeah.
definitely beyond everything else. I mean, they don't even have regular law there. They've got Napoleonic law where the cops can just fill out. It's like blank thing, and they're just like, my friends who were buskers down there, they had the famous thing. They were like, you could get arrested for leaning with the intent to fall, or obstructing the flight path of a pigeon, or you could get arrested for molesting a cheeseburger, things like this.
Oh, this is shit that I've never heard. I'm
Yeah,
I'm learning right now. That's insane.
I thought you would have known that. Yeah, Napoleonic law is crazy. You're guilty before you get to court, and they're really known for holding people for in longer amount of time, and then just turning you loose a week later,
Oh,
saying, "Oh yeah, no charges. It was a mistake. Sorry, you're free to go."
so corrupt without due process, right?
Mm.
Um,
Yeah,
damn. Well, fuck Napoleonic law. Fuck all that shit.
fuck that guy, man.
We don't like him. We don't like
Uh,
him around here.
uh, but yeah, well, speaking of laws, I mean, what do you think is going to be able to stop? Obviously, we do a lot of griping about capitalism. What are we going to do to stop capitalism? What do you think is honest the answer here?
It's not it's not an easy answer. I think as I've learned, there are three components to every social movement: agitate, educate, organize. And every success from people to expand and further human rights has always come from massive popular support. It comes from organizing. And I just think that we all need to, everybody has different skill sets, talents, capacities to mobilize and to, organize against these institutions, which are inherently exploitative and oppressive. And I don't think that there's like one answer. I think that there's like, it's going to take the mobilization of the working class, obviously, but I think in order to mobilize workers, you have to educate them first on what's happening. And I just don't feel like at this point, this is my own personal take, and I think that there are a lot of working class institutions and that are doing great work, and there is a fight going on. There is a class war happening, and sometimes it's in the open, just like Karl Marx says. Sometimes it's in the open, sometimes it's hidden, sometimes there's regress, sometimes there's progress, but it's always being fought. And we need to be my own skill set is to articulate and to communicate. I'm a teacher by trade, so I want to share and disseminate ideas and educate people so that we all are on the same page. We all understand that we are united by our socioeconomic conditions, not by cultural issues. The ruling class wants to fracture us by having us focus on the culture war when it's really always been a class war. And anyway, I know that's not really a simple answer, but I think also it's just, capitalism is prone to failure. I think it's, inevitable that communism will win because it's baked into, the political economy of capitalism to fail. It's going to collapse. It collapses every 4 to 7 years. We know this. And when it collapses, we have to be ready. It's a class war. We need to strike when our opponent is weak. It's just like anything. When your opponent is strong, you might be on the defensive. But when your opponent shows a weakness, that's the time to strike. So I think, it's one of the things that I like to talk about on my live stream is just how, this is an age-old, these ideas have been talked about and fought for and died for centuries now. This is nothing new that I'm saying, but people, liberals seem to think that it's going to come from, and this is a common perception, I think, that we can somehow achieve a working class revolution through the political the political sphere, like by going out and voting, in other words, voting in socialist leaders and using the political apparatus that we have now. And I think that's a lie. I don't believe that. I don't think that the people in power are going to hand you the keys to the kingdom, so to speak, hand you the means by which to take their power away. And I don't advocate for, a Republican, or voting a Republican or a Democrat. The two-party system is obviously like a lie. I mean, people should understand the ratchet effect, that how Republicans push everything to the right, the Democrats block movement back to the left. It's a slowly sliding into fascism. Voting for the lesser of two evils is going to basically enables fascism. Fascists require a weak opposition, ineffectual party, like the Democrats. And I think it's, people say vote blue no matter who, and it's two sides of the same coin. It's not two. You see this political theater happening, and you think democracy is being struggled for because there's debate, but the debate is within these very narrow confines. And I think this is it's more like just one thing that we're seeing. It's not two sides. It's just like this is the theatrical play that's being played out before us. And so what I try to advocate for is workers organizing. I think the real, overthrow of capitalism is going to happen through the mobilization of the working class, who can affect material power over the economy. And I read a book recently that was very inspiring to me, called Labor, Power, and Strategy by John Womack, who I can't speak highly enough of. And he goes through all this about the different choke points in the economy, where it would take a relatively small amount of workers that if they striked, it could shut down large swaths of the economy and demonstrate material power over the capitalists, because the capitalists only understand one thing. They understand money. They understand the economy. They, if something is negatively, affecting the economy, they will react. And that's where, but, the work, I'm trying to teach people that the working class is really the class that holds the power. We only have to realize it. So yeah, there's basically in a nutshell, there's two different lines of thought. There's one that thinks that, and this goes back to the first Communist International headed by Marx. I mean, at that time, people still believe that, socialism could be achieved in the Western capitalist developed countries, through political means, by voting these socialist leaders. They all thought that, Britain was going to be, or France was going to be the spot, the country where that was going to happen. And, when Lenin comes around, it's something new. It's like, no, there's no, we've been politically disenfranchised. They're not going to hand the power away in that manner. And we need to, show that we have power over the economy. And, that's why I love the Houthis. Can we talk about the Houthis?
Let's talk about the Houthis. Obviously their conflict started in 2014 with Saudi-backed coalition wanted to bomb them back to the Stone Age for whatever reason. Maybe you can tell us how that started.
Well, I'm not a scholar on, the Saudi-Yemeni conflict, but I know that Saudi Arabia has been, bombing. They've been embroiled in a civil war, Saudi Arabia and Yemen, for 8 years or so. And the Houthis have, their slogan is, death to America, death to Israel. And, Saudi Arabia is basically a United States proxy. And, Saudi Arabia is, using American manufactured bombs to, destroy Yemen. And the Houthis are opposing their own devastation. They're like, what more can you throw at us? We've already been bombed to the Stone Age. Like, bring on America. We're not going to back down. And I admire them for that. I think that Saudi Arabia, is trying to control Yemen and control their resources, and the Houthis are standing against that. Anyway, they've been, like I said, in this sort of clash, this war for 8 years, and the Saudi Arabia did not win. Basically, they lost, and they were able to, the Houthis were basically able to get a ceasefire agreement. Now, all that changed recently with the genocide in the Gaza Strip, and the point that I was trying to make with the Houthis is that they are also choking the economy. They're doing what I think the American working class should be doing in a symbolic sense. They're demonstrating material power over the global economy, however partial that might be. It's not like they have the material power to shut down the global economy, but they can affect trade, and commerce in a very strategic location, the Suez Canal, the Red Sea. And that is considered a choke point in the economy. And that's why it's got the United States' attention, because, it's disrupting the status quo, and we can't have any disruption in the status quo. That's not to be tolerated, So it's just, I know I'm kind of bouncing around here, but the United States is just doubling down on this genocide every turn. They're fighting with the people that are opposing the genocide, that are trying to do something about it. It's egregious. It's awful. I'm so disgusted with the United States government. And I sympathize with the Houthis, with armed resistance groups that are fighting their own occupation, their own extirpation, their own genocide. So you got Hamas, Hezbollah, and Houthis, the three H's. I mean, these are the armed resistance groups. They're being bombed relentlessly. I mean, how can the detractors of these armed resistance groups are, they're not being deprived of human rights. They don't know what that's like. They're not living in what we call the third world. Yemen is one of the poorest places on earth. Gaza is one of the most densely packed places on earth, one of the poorest places. We're talking about the poorest of the poorest. And yes, that foments extremism. So if we want to point a finger at anyone, we look at Israel. We look at the United States. This is the world that the United States has created. They are the global superpower and have been ever since World War II. It's been, unparalleled in history. It's the greatest empire in human history, and, as far as I'm concerned. And, I think I have to, people love to, the first thing, people love to clutch their pearls and condemn Hamas. And I'm just, I'm here to say, no, we need to put a stop to that kind of talk. That is, you're playing into the hands of the U.S. empire, and you're basically whitewashing all the violence that the United States and the Israeli government have done for decades. There's no power symmetry here. I mean, it's completely asymmetrical. You have one of the, I forgot his name, Michael Brooks, I think, was saying that, it's the greatest, most powerful country in the Middle East, backed by the most powerful country in the world. And they are massacring the indigenous population, which are completely disenfranchised and completely orphaned by the international community. There's we just sit by on the sidelines and watch this happening, unfolding, and nobody's doing anything. I mean, what do you expect? Of course, this is what you get, world. You get Hamas, you get Hezbollah, you get Houthis. When you deprive people of human rights, don't be surprised when they turn violent. I mean, that's what you would do in the same situation. That's what I would do. If somebody is slaughtering your family, if they're bombing your cities, destroying your homes, this this is what happens. What do you expect these people to do? Just lay over, keel over and die and just take it, quietly? No. And, going back to like, then people want to talk about, well, the attack on October 7th, they killed innocent people. Okay. Well, they're reporting their own bias. They're reporting their own bias in that they don't want to talk about the context. They don't want to talk about what happened before October 7th. History started on October 7th. We only care about the innocent people that, died on October 7th, but not before or after. And like I said, if you want to look at the stats and run through the numbers, the Palestinians have incurred way more death and destruction. And you can read the human rights reports. You can cite international law. You can cite the world consensus. This is all very well understood and out in the open. But
what are the most common things that you hear from Zionists? Because I know I run into them all the time. What are some of these weird illogical arguments that they keep repeating?
I'm so glad you asked. So let's go through the list of nonsense. Yeah. One thing you hear is that 3,000 years ago in biblical times there was the Merneptah stele, and on the Merneptah stele they called it Israel. So we have a right to ethnically cleanse these indigenous people today. And that's just it's a baby-brained argument to say that we're going to invoke biblical times or biblical rights as a justification for mass murder. I mean, it's so wild. And you're citing the Bible, really? Which is not a historical, is not supposed to be some sort of accurate historical depiction. It's pure fantasy. But nobody's saying that Jewish people don't have a claim to that land, but also that there's a lot of, we could go through, if it's just like sort of cherry picking where you want to start in history. We could, the Palestinians, the Arabs have a claim to the land. That doesn't mean that, they deserve their own ethnic cleansing. But biblical rights have no status in the world today. Nobody can say, according to, 3,000 years ago, here's my version of history, and that gives me the right to take this land from these people. That's just nobody, you'd be laughed at, right? If countries just behaved in that way all the time, it'd just be chaos. So why does Israel legitimately get away with this? Well, they're backed by, their patrons, which are the most powerful people in the world. So we know why that is. So that just kind of goes back to a might makes right argument. I think all of it sort of leads back to might makes right.
Yeah. I wanted to compare it to always when I talk to people, I say, imagine that you're living at a house and somebody who lived there when they were a kid show up and say, hey, this was my childhood home. Can how about you live in the garage and then we'll take the rest of the house?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's a perfect, I think it's a good analogy. And, and then when you say, no, this is my home, you're not going to kick me out and lead me to the basement or the garage. Well, then what do Zionists say now? You're kind of alluding to the partition plan of 1947, 1948. The Zionists, the pro-Zionists today want to say things like, well, look, they had a good deal. They could have, been given, 44, and it really was, they were giving up, let us all remember that the 1948 partition plan instituted by the UN afforded the majority of the land to the minority settlers. Hang on, my cat's being atrocious right now.
Cat break. Sorry. They asked the UN to carve them up a plan, and then they forced it on the Palestinians.
Yeah. And the indigenous majority, there was I forget how many, but it was like over 1 million, 1.7, I want to say million Palestinian Arabs that had to be, removed from their land, basically. It forced, 750,000 of them out, and 250,000 of those went to the Gaza Strip and became refugees. So you're saying that, the UN was not a moral, decision. It was just, the UN is an arm of the United States. The United States was the are the patrons of the Zionists. And that was inherited from the British Empire, who were the original patrons of the Zionist movement. And the UN gave the minority settlers the majority of the land and all the nice arable land, and they gave the indigenous majority a minority of that land, and that doesn't make much. So that's why the Palestinian Arabs, revolted. I mean, what would you do? I mean, if somebody, the British Empire or the United States Empire came in and took your homes from you, I don't think.
Well, the Chuds will have you believe that there's no right time for an armed resistance until they do it, and in the name of fascism, then it's
Right.
okay.
Yeah, and the people that in around that time, even before the partition plan, you had terrorist organizations like the Irgun and the I think the Lehigh or the Stern Gang.
Lehigh.
Yeah. And these they committed massacres. There's one of them was, one of them I know about. There's another, there's a lot more, but the Deir Yasin massacre in 1948. They killed a couple hundred, I think, or maybe it was just 100 Palestinian women and children. But they would go around to these villages and just massacre them, and that would also have, like, they even on record. I'm talking about the early Zionist settlers and the leaders of these terrorist organizations, who went on to become prime minister of Israel when the state was formed. I'm talking about Menachem Begin. I'm talking about Moshe Dayan, who became the defense minister. These people were the leaders of these terrorist organizations, which committed massacres on the Palestinian Arabs. And they had, they're on record of saying how that produced a good effect. Like they only had to kill like maybe 100 of them, but it forced so many others just to leave, just by that one massacre, that produced that great, consequence, that it also expelled other ones because they didn't want to be, massacred. So it's like, so yeah, that's one of the arguments. I could keep talking about all this stuff.
Yeah, man. Well, give me another one. Give me another common argument with these nut bars about why it's okay to kill children and whatever. Yeah.
Well, Hamas rockets. Okay. That's another one. The Hamas rockets. Hamas is firing rockets. So, Israel has a right to defend itself. That's the 2 points that they try to make. Okay. Well, what Norman Finkelstein outlines in his book, and if you haven't read that, I suggest, I recommend it. Israel has no right to defend itself in occupied territory. The only way that Israel can claim a right to self-defense against Hamas rockets is if it, ended its illegal blockade and it retreated and did not, control the land and sea borders and the airspace, and, basically allowed Palestinians to self-determine and self-govern, right?
Mm.
In that situation, if they respected the peaceful, secure borders under international law, if in that situation Hamas continued to fire rockets into Israel, then they might have a case for self-defense. But this is very clearly stated in the Geneva Conventions, all these international standards that we have in place to prevent things like this from happening, to enforce peaceful settlements, to diplomacy, right? Under international law, what's so crazy is that the United States and Israel are rogue states. They're not operating under international laws and standards. They're basically saying we're above all that. We can do whatever we want, and it's a rules-based order for everyone else and not for us. Because actually, under international law, Hamas has the right to use violence against illegal occupiers. I mean, that's a human right. Yeah. And another point is that, well, then they would say, well, they killed innocent people and they used indiscriminate violence. Well, these people don't have an army. They don't have a navy. They don't have military technology. They don't have satellites. They don't have an air force. They cannot conduct an armed resistance that rises to the standards of the conventions of war, which have been enshrined by the rich. They have to fashion makeshift, rudimentary, improvised rockets, most of which, of all the rockets that are fired at Israel, only a small fraction of them actually hit a building in Israel. Most of them land in the green zone, which is a territory right outside the compound of the Gaza Strip, the wall, and before settlements start in Israel. So they in order to have precise weaponry, you need money. You need funding. You need an economy. They are denied all of those things. They are denied having an economy. And so under international law, you can use notional, symbolic violence to protest your own ethnic cleansing, genocide, massacre. You're seeing your families get slaughtered, your houses destroyed, your institutions destroyed. You are allowed under international law to resist that in any way that you can, even if there is no hope and you're just firing indiscriminately because that's the only thing that you can do. I mean, and Norman Finkelstein also brings up the point of how that relates to, we could look at historical examples. He brings up the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, where, Jewish people used indiscriminate violence to fight against their Nazi occupiers. And do we condemn those Jewish people for, living in a concentration camp, for trying to revolt against their own, being massacred? No, that doesn't make any sense. So the same thing with the Nat Turner Rebellion in 1831. They used indiscriminate violence against white people. It's against the superstructure of slavery. Nobody condemns slaves for using violence to try to overthrow their slave masters. And I think if people can look at this through the lens of dialectical materialism, which is just two big words, but all it means is that to understand human events in human history, you look to the society and you look at how the material conditions, you look at the material conditions of social groups within that society, and that explains human events. So who has what, who has access to what, for what, all these questions are important. How does the society organize around the economy? Because at the end of the day, we are united by our material conditions. We all need, first of all things, we need water and food to keep living. Every human has material needs. So what we're seeing is that one social group is being deprived of those human rights, those human needs, and another group is doing the depriving and has all the rights, has all the power. Like I said before, there's no power symmetry here. It's complete and unilateral domination. And, that's sort of what we're looking at. And I just want people to understand it in that context, because that explains everything. It's very simple. It's not a complex issue.
This is a great point, that civilization is predicated on how we treat each other in a civilized way without killing and raping and burglarizing each other on a constant everyday basis, is because of material conditions that we have. I can attest to this because I was a poor person that did pretty shitty things. And as soon as I had some security and some, nice things in my life, everything turned around and I became a lot less likely to stab somebody in the eye with a fork or steal your briefcase.
That's right. Stealing, people are, this goes back to privatization. When you privatize public resources, this goes back to capitalism, in my opinion. But most crimes are crimes of poverty. They're, and they're only considered crimes because poor people are doing them. We don't talk about the rich people stealing from the poor people. That's considered good business. When poor people steal, that's crime. That's frowned upon. That goes back to, Michael Parenti put it eloquently when he talks about how there's different kinds of violence, right? And that's what people also need to understand, that violence is in some cases justified and necessary. And it's always the violence of the oppressed against the oppressor, which is justified. There is no justification for violence of the oppressor against the oppressed. And so what he says, and I repeat this a lot, is that violence done to preserve the status quo is considered by the status quo to be promoting stability, right? Promoting democracy, promoting the rules-based order. But anytime that violence is done to upend the privileged class, the social relations of the privileged classes in society, that's called terrorism. So when poor people commit violence to which is morally justified, that's considered terrorism. It's not considered terrorism to drop a JDAM missile into a hospital and kill hundreds of civilians. That's because, everyone's a Hamas operative, right? So, I think that's an important point, is that there are different kinds of violence and with different, motivations and a different set of morality.
Yeah. You just said something about what about the whole human shields argument? Right?
Yeah, human shields. And this is also, all of this information that I'm pulling from can be found in this book, Gaza, An Inquest into Its Martyrdom by Norman Finkelstein. He goes through all of these points. And, I think there's even a chapter dedicated to the idea that, Hamas uses human shields, which is basically everything that the Israeli state says is a lie. And that would almost necessarily be true given, the power dynamic at play here in this geopolitical event that is between Israel and Palestine. But they would have to lie in order to justify this, because there's no justification for it. But that being said, of the hundreds of human rights reports that have been written, we're talking Amnesty International, we're talking Human Rights Watch, the UN. There's a famous one called the Goldstone Report, written by a South African jurist who was also a Jewish Zionist, who was a pro-Israeli. His name was Richard Goldstone, and even he condemned Israel and unilaterally condemned them for what in that instance was called Operation Cast Lead in 2009. But there's no evidence. But my point is that of the hundreds of human rights reports, there's no factual, concrete evidence that Hamas uses its own civilians as human shields. To the contrary, there's actually mountains of evidence that the IDF, the Israeli diaper forces, use Palestinians as human shield. And I can give you 3 examples. One, they would situate Palestinian hostages that they captured, in front of artillery and tanks while they were positioned, in city centers or wherever there was combat. And they would fire from these artillery tanks at buildings, at wherever, and they would have those hostages situated, like I said, in front of the artillery and the tanks, so as to not inspire a reprisal from Hamas to fire at those tanks and artillery. So that's a war crime. Okay. It also instills a lot of, dread and fear into the people that you're terrorizing, that are being placed in that position. They would also walk, civilians, Palestinians. The IDF would walk civilians in front of them and fire over their shoulder. I mean, that's literally a human shield. And all this, you don't take my word for it, read this book and go through it. And these are firsthand accounts, this is human rights reports that people on the ground taking testimony. Some of them, some of the IDF soldiers themselves incriminate by their own statements. They incriminate the Israeli government. And the third instance was that they would put Palestinians, situate them in windows of buildings, and then fire from behind their shoulder. So I mean, and then just yesterday we saw that the IDF was impersonating Hamas and going into a hospital to conduct a raid on that hospital. So, you know, the fact that, and that's sort of ironic, right? Because what does the Israeli government say all the time? That Hamas is, embedded in civilian life. Well, there they are embedding themselves as if they are, Hamas, or actually not even Hamas, but just, civilians, like they're dressed like doctors. They're literally dressing themselves up as if they are Palestinian civilians, and then, going on a murderous raid. So
I think it's amazing that some of the media actually would even pick up on the fact that it is clearly the IDF undercover, rather than just say, "Look, see, this is exactly what we said. Look, there's Hamas dressed up in civilian clothes. That's why we need to bomb everything that moves."
I mean, that is yeah. I mean, I'm sure that they've done something to that effect. Like the covert actions. The subversive actions to. It's a big. We're in an information war. They're trying to control the narrative. I mean, obviously, and then think about how the other story that came out like last week was how there were 12 UN workers that were aiding and abetting Hamas during October 7th. And that's what we're going to focus on, right? We're not going to focus on the 27,000 civilians, 11,000 of which were children that have been killed in the past 3 or 4 months. We're going to talk about the 12 UN workers who the Israeli government says were aiding Hamas. And what I think Norman Finkelstein, I know I quote him a lot, but I think he said all that really says is that these people that were in Hamas actually had jobs. I don't think people understand, that the Palestinians did not need Hamas to radicalize them. Hamas did not radicalize the Palestinian population. The Israeli government did. When you have the Israeli government dropping, javelin missiles into their homes and destroying their family, killing their families, that does the radicalization for you. That puts it in these people's minds that they need to fight against this militant ethno state. It has nothing to do with Hamas. People that want to hyper focus on Hamas and the violence that they use is missing. Like I say, bro lost the plot.
Right, bro lost the plot. I mean, Israel even signed up for a website called Hamas.com, where they wanted people to come and pretend like they were Hamas, and then explain to them what Hamas is all about. And then it turned out the whole website was full of like spyware and malware and stuff, and it had like in all the virus protective sort of apps that you have. This website Hamas.com was horribly ridden with like stuff stealing your data and stuff like this. So,
yeah. So the Israeli government created a website trying to say, "Hey, sign up for Hamas here," and then
or like this is what we're about. Generally, trying to explain what Hamas's objectives are. You know what I mean?
Well, shit, I might want to sign up for that. I want to be a Hamas. I want to be a Houthi.
A hot Houthi pirate.
What's that?
A hot Houthi pirate.
A hot Houthi pirate. I want to be the Yemeni Timothy Chalamet. Where's that guy? That's my dream. I want to be a pirate on the Red Sea.
Yeah. But you're absolutely right when you say Israel is the one that's sort of giving birth to this. I was going to ask you what you thought about. Isn't it the actions of the West over the course of the last 100 years, which has sort of given birth to all the radical groups that we're dealing with now, like Radical Iran and ISIS and things like this?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. This all goes back to U.S. imperialism. If the United States would just stay the fuck out of everyone's business, stop fucking with people. When I went to Qatar last year, I met a lot of people, and one in particular stands out. He was a Syrian, and he just had this vitriol, like real, genuine rage for the United States. And that's one of the things that he told me, just like, go home. He wasn't talking to me specifically. He was just saying to the United States, like, if they would just go the fuck home, like, leave us alone. Nobody wants to be, messed with. I mean, this is a complete double standard, and I just think that the world's very simple to understand. Like Noam Chomsky says, the world is run like the mafia, and the United States is the Godfather. And I think that's a pretty good analogy to describe things. I mean, when you control, as Henry Kissinger has said, and when you control food, you can control people. Okay, what is the Israeli state doing? They're controlling their food. They're putting them on a diet of starvation. I mean, these are like verbatim words. And I want to talk about that too, but and when you control oil, you can control nations. So that's why the United States has made such a clear number one foreign policy objective to control the Middle East oil. And a lot of that has to do with the Cold War and just, making sure that the United States was the preeminent global empire. So they needed to control all of the resources. Not that the United States needs to use or consume the oil in the Middle East. They just need to have their hands on the spigot. They need to be able to control it. So then they can control what other countries do. And I think that's been a driving, directive of the United States. That's a driving policy of the United States government for ever since, we became the global superpower in 1945. But yeah, and another thing is like the Israeli government, you need to look no further than the Israeli politicians, the Israeli officials, the Zionist leaders, the Zionist settlers, the early, Zionist leaders, going back to 1895. All you need to look at is what they were saying and what they were doing to incriminate them. Anything that a pro-Zionist wants to say, you can, incriminate them by citing one of these officials, and they do it so blatantly and so openly. It's such a clear case. It's like there are many geopolitical events that are complex in the world, and this is not one of them.
I mean, going back to Herzl, the guy that invented the whole thing, he was basically from Eastern Europe or something, and he said, there's people living there. We don't care. We're going there.
Yeah, basically. In fact, he there's a quote, and I'll have to pull it up. I don't have it readily at hand, but it's something to the effect of, like you're saying, we know that there are people there, and what we need to do. He was basically devising or stating a plan of how they needed to remove the Palestinians from that land in order to make way for the Jewish Zionist settlers. And then even went so far as to talk about how to externalize their economy. And then, it sort of clicked for me because he said this in 1895. And I just recently read a book by Sarah Roy about the Gaza Strip called The Political Economy of De-Development. And she talks about the 5 pillars or the 5 factors of de-development. And the 5 are dispossession, expropriation, dispossession, expropriation. Now, those two go hand in hand. If you dispossess people of resources, you're also expropriating them for yourself. Or if you expropriate, you're also dispossessing. So you can't do one without the other, if that makes sense. So those are the first 2. Then it's externalization and integration, which I also thought were like 2 sides of the same coin. So what does it mean to externalize their economy? Well, when you dispossess them of their resources, who do they have to go to for an economy? Who do they have to go to for those resources? They have to go to the Israeli state. They have to, ask master for, food and water, and that's exactly what has happened when you take control of people's land and resources and labor. So now they have to, and the other side of that would be integration. So the Israeli state integrated their economy into the Gaza Strip, into the West Bank, into Palestine, and by doing so, they externalized the Palestinians' economy, meaning that they now had to go to another state or to another entity to have an economy, to have trade and all this stuff, and have
Yeah.
commodities.
I found it funny that when they heard, we got the news, they shut off water to Gaza. The Israelis have shut off water to Gaza. And everybody goes, good, they're terrorists, blah, blah, blah. But nobody ever asked, why do they have control of their water in the first place?
Right, exactly. And, the Israeli government is trying to paint themselves as victims of of oppression. I've never heard of a situation where you could shut off the food, water, electricity, and fuel of your oppressor. I know. I mean, just use your logic, use your common sense, and you can see that there's no argument to be made by these people. But yeah, it was just interesting that these were conscious policy decisions, by the British government, by the early Zionist leaders. They knew what they were doing, and it was outlined, as early as 1895 by Theodore Herzl, like the process of integration, externalization, the dispossession, the expropriation, de-institutionalizing these people. They knew this. They knew that they were going to have to do this way back in the 1800s. And right now, I'm reading a book, that was written in 1995, and all of this stuff came true. We're talking about it now. It's still going on. So it's just wild when you actually delve into the historical record to see how obvious everything is, and there's so much to talk about.
Right, and it doesn't match up at all with what people are being spoon-fed on the news either. This is no historical context, no rational, logical, historical basis whatsoever. Just a whole heaping wheelbarrow full of bullshit.
Basically. I mean, yeah, it's there's no justification for the Israeli state, and it's a violent apartheid state, and it needs to be ended. The occupation needs to be ended.
Well, hopefully somebody gets the memo to America that the age of colonialism is over and that we're moving on. Everybody's got the internet. Everybody can see this genocide happening in live time on Facebook Live or whatever. It doesn't look good. And no, they're not going to stand for it. Jews make up 0.002% of the population. I think white Westerners make up 2% of the world's population. Muslims make up like 20% of the world's population. The chickens are going to come home to roost, and it's going to get ugly. Yeah.
I think those are very prescient words, Chris.
Thanks, buddy. Well, look, come back next week. Let's finish up because we got too much to talk about.
Absolutely. I'd love it. Thank you for having me on. I can't believe it's already been an hour. So
I know it flew by, honestly. Well, I'll stop the thing and then we'll talk right after this.
Okay, cool.
Peace. Oh, find my dude Rathbone, Instagram, TikTok, wherever he's not shadow banned. He'll be there delivering up the goods.
Thank you.
All right. Take it easy.